Hello, and welcome to Soul Play, where we explore the art of living with curiosity, connection, and creativity. I'm your host, Sarah Benoit, and I'm so incredibly grateful you're here. Throughout my journey, I've crossed paths with remarkable individuals, guests who join us here to share their wisdom, stories, and practical insights. These inspiring voices are shaping a better world, offering perspectives and tools that my younger self would have loved to discover. Soul Play is more than just a podcast. It's an invitation for all of us to show up authentically, reclaim our power, and reconnect with the essence of who we truly are. Today's guest is Gemini Adams. Gemini is a trauma recovery specialist who is passionate about resolving the painful legacy of childhood trauma. She has over 25 years of experience delivering effective treatments for those who grew up with emotional neglect, abandonment, or abuse, resulting in survival mode and maladaptive relating strategies as the norm. Gemini has contributed to the fields of mental health and social change worldwide, working in addiction recovery with the Center for Relational Healing in the USA and betrayal trauma recovery with Helping Couples Heal. She has spent the past 8 years offering trauma awareness training programs throughout Asia with Union Institute and has a private practice working in person and online to treat the invisible disability that is complex post-traumatic stress disorder using a combination of somatic therapies and inner child parts work. In this deeply insightful conversation, we explore how unresolved trauma keeps many of us trapped in survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze, disrupting our ability to connect, feel joy, or set boundaries. Gemini shares her wisdom on the importance of embodied safety, the difference between PTSD and complex PTSD, and how somatic practices like trauma release exercises and trauma-sensitive yoga can support healing. If you're seeking to understand why you feel stuck, disconnected, or overwhelmed, and want practical strategies to move forward, this episode's for you. Without further ado, I welcome Gemini Adams. Gemini, welcome to the show.
Hello, I'm grateful to be here. Hi.
Hello, it's such a gift to have you here. I have been wanting to sit around a microphone with you for quite some time. I'm so inspired by everything you're doing. I remember I first met you here in Copenhagen at a trauma awareness training that you were facilitating, which has been profoundly impactful for me personally. I tell all my friends about it and recommend and feel like it really should just be a prereq for humans, to gain insight about trauma, about their system, their nervous system. And I remember coming to you after this held container, which was a week long, really beautiful, really intense, and being like, how do we spread this to the world? If you're ever open to bringing it, I'm Canadian, so perhaps if one day I could facilitate it in Canada, I was just so inspired. So thank you for being here with me today.
Yeah. It's a real honor, and I share a similar desire to help spread this work to the world. You mentioned that it should be a prerequisite for humans, and it's so interesting to me that I really kind of bumped into a lot of this in my late 30s and early 40s. So I'd stumbled around the planet very unaware of what was happening inside what I will now call my human operating system, which we are completely subject to, therefore. When we talk about the nervous system, we're referencing the autonomic nervous system, which means it's automatic, it's happening whether we like it or not. And, just the fact that we think we have choice, that we believe that we are making set choices in our lives, and we are, except a lot of them are coming from reactive states that we're in due to what's happening in our physiology or our embodied safety. And so many of us obviously did not receive this education about what's happening at the level of embodied safety inside our bodies, and how what's happening there actually impacts our mood, impacts our behavior, impacts our levels of concentration and connection, and perhaps most importantly impacts our levels of relational capacity. And I think we've all struggled in that department, and it's both frustrating and wonderfully exciting to have the answers to that, to have tools and solutions that can help people to really relate in ways that reduce conflict, create fields of harmony, develop individuals' abilities for attunement to better notice what's happening in the nervous system and the presence, the level of embodied safety in someone else, to know, oh, now is not the time to ask that question or make that move, right? So from my perspective, the training that you mentioned is very much designed for practitioners, facilitators, teachers. We have the strapline, anyone in the business of helping others, right? But actually, and you may have experienced this yourself, when people come into the program with this intention of professional development, what happens is they very quickly realize, oh, this is actually for me. There's all this stuff that I'm learning that is as true for me as it is for the people I'm holding space for or teaching. And it then becomes obvious that we could all really benefit from understanding this underlying operating system that we all have.
We're human. We got the system, and it's beautiful to gain knowledge and really understand, to start to dance with this rather than being taken over by it. I'm really looking forward to getting into it here today with you. If you wouldn't mind letting us know why you came to this work. I know that it sounds like similar to me. Perhaps you didn't have the tools until much later than I personally would have liked. Why they don't teach this stuff in school to children is just beyond me, right? Mm-hmm. So what brought you to this work, and what drives you to be so passionate about it?
In relation to my own experiences, many of us, and I would say an increasing number of us, due to capitalism, actually grew up in homes where there was an absence of emotional support, an absence of presence, an absence of a human who had what we call a regulated nervous system, who was in embodied safety, who could care for us. And if we look back historically, the way that we have been operating for millennia as humans is in a village setting or tribal setting, where there are lots of bodies to whom we go to when we are having a nervous system response that is one where we've moved into fear, which is the underlying elements of fight flight, or which we call a stress response, or we've moved into survival mode, which is where there's a threat in the space that means actually we're really not safe, and if there is no one around, we're going to stay stuck in those survival states rather than seeking connection, co-regulation, being able to kind of be moved through back into a non-stress state, which I actually now call success. So we have these innate responses, and our bodies are designed this way. There's nothing we can do about this, right? Autonomic nervous system means that it's just happening inside of us in response to things that are happening in the environment, or in response to things that are happening inside of us. And so we're all designed this way. We're designed this way actually to help us get out of situations that are threatening. And so it's not bad, these different states. And the most extreme one of them, which is shut down and freeze, is a very powerful protective mechanism that actually, in the event that we were in a very dangerous situation and possibly about to die, it actually prevents us from feeling so much pain if we're going to have a sticky end, right? So there's purpose to this design. The challenge is that, as a modern world that we've grown into, where we're not connected to nature so much, we're not living in community settings like we once were, we're in a system where, due to the loss of relationship to the land and food source, we are in a kind of stress response of needing to accumulate more money for food and shelter, the basic things that were actually freely available to us once. So this forces everyone to be in this kind of stress response without a break. And this is destructive. And then add into that the fact that many of us had the absence of things I was just mentioning, a mother in the home, because now you need two parents out working to provide enough because the cost of living has gone up so much, and the price difference, even in 20-30 years between what you needed to buy a home and what you now need to buy a home has shifted. So this absence of a caregiver, a consistent caregiver who can support your nervous system as you grow from infancy to early adulthood, is also missing. And so what this does is means we end up with lots of individuals who have not learnt how to work with this nervous system. They haven't learnt it through osmosis of being around a safe caregiver. We outsource to many kids in a kindergarten situation with 1 or 2 caregivers, it's not, the ratio is not enough. You can't learn in that setting. And then we also have an increase really in the transgenerational trauma, so traumas that have happened over the years and have not been resolved in individuals, and a lot of obvious traumas happening on planet Earth, which we're either experiencing directly or we're experiencing vicarious trauma because we're learning about it through the news, which actually creates shock still to our nervous system. And so we kind of have a very complex situation at the moment in terms of large parts of the population being in these collective trauma responses in the nervous system that we should naturally be able to flow through very easily, but because of everything I just talked about, we actually get stuck in the wrong gear. So instead of being in the state of the nervous system, which is where we are resting really easily, our bodies are doing the repair work, we're in play and joy and easy connection and easy relatability, most of us actually stuck in this fight-flight response, which is stress, and we can't shift out. So we get into more conflict with our loved ones, we experience more anxiety, we experience more distress, we don't experience joy and connection as much, we start to develop health problems over time, or worse, we're stuck in the state of freeze and disconnection, dissociation, numbness, individualization, isolation, depression. And so if we actually look at the statistics around the world of this, vast increase in anxiety and depression, it correlates directly with individuals being stuck in these states and not knowing the way out. And I think I've been studying yoga for 25 years, and the evolution of yoga coming to the West was kind of maybe this is the answer. And in some ways it was. It started to bring in this concept of embodiment, but it also brought with it this, spiritual component that somehow, if we're just in connection with spirit, we'll be okay. And what that does is bypasses the fact that we have a body. Our body needs to be in relation to the earth. We need our nervous system to be in a certain state to feel good inside, to not be in depression or anxiety. And we kind of, as a large group of people, went into this kind of collective spiritual bypass. Like the answer is in spirituality and enlightenment, and not really seeing actually if we can come back into our bodies, be in embodied safety, be in right relationship to each other and the earth, then we naturally feel great. We feel innate happiness, we feel innate joy, we feel deep connection. And so there is this new movement that has emerged in the last 20, 30 years from somatic experiencing and other somatic therapies. Some of the key figureheads in this world being Peter Levine, Dr. David Bocelli, Van der Kolk, and also polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges. And it's kind of moved us into this depth of understanding of all of this. So like you, I have a kind of part of me that says, why is this not being taught in schools? Well, in part because we didn't know this stuff. We really didn't understand it to the degree that we have gained knowledge in the last 20, 30 years. And as is often the way with most things, it starts in a tiny pocket somewhere in the world, and then it starts to grow. And, Peter Levine he was a stress scientist for NASA, kind of started to identify this and then set up a school, and slowly it's expanded. And I really do believe that we're moving in that direction. There are really great organizations developing what's called trauma-informed education, which instead of, responding to children who are clearly stuck in fight-flight states and acting out from that place, instead of punishing them and making them feel worse, even when they're already kind of, not knowing what to do because they're in a dysfunctional home and there is no soothing, there is no regulation coming from healthy parents, the teachers are actually teaching them that and providing that, and consequently the problem resolves itself. Personally, I would like to find a way to magnify that into many other communities on the planet, which is kind of partly what I'm doing anyway. So we're in a evolutionary stage, is the way I see it, moving away from embodiment practices that were very heavily linked to something out there, spirit, into actually embodiment practices that really help us to come into relationship with this and learn how to live comfortably in this. And from that, then we can learn to live with the other. And for me, this is how we get to world peace. It's not through just sitting and praying for world peace. It's through actively engaging with this system, because when it's regulated, when it's soothed, when we're in the rest and digest state, we are peaceful. But we're in a culture, we're in a collective system that pushes us into stress response, and it is in fight that we are oriented towards competition. And actually, when we're in this rest and digest state, we are oriented towards collaboration. So it's part of something evolutionary in terms of, as we gain true knowledge about this, and not just the intellectual knowledge, but the embodied understanding of it, which is a big part of the trauma awareness trainings. And we learn those practices and how to facilitate those to groups of humans and help them gain those skills too. Then we get this lovely kind of ripple effect happening, which is really what I'm, passionate about doing. And education into the younger generation is definitely a part of that for me as well.
Absolutely. Less unlearning if we start from a younger age, right? And yeah, thank you for sharing. There's a lot to unpack there. I do hear and see that there has been exponential growth in a direction that is very away from that kind of hunter-gatherer, communal living, a sense of regulated nervous system within your family and community. It's a huge, huge shift. And I think we're just trying to catch up as humans, and being in a fast-paced world, it's been quite a challenge. And I will also say, like, our nervous systems and our systems in general, they're brilliant, right? Like you said, all of these things, they're happening from a protective mechanism stance. So thank you, body. But also it's then identifying, okay, in this moment, it's actually a disservice, right? So when I'm disconnected, I'm not connected with myself, then it's challenging to connect with other people, which leads to a challenge with connecting with the planet and animals, etc. So thank you for really exposing all of that. And I think that'll resonate for listeners, really. And so I would love to get into just trauma in general, right? We've all experienced this because of that change in lifestyle in particular. But where do we go from here? How do we incorporate the body into this for healing?
Yeah, so a lot of therapeutic, psychotherapeutic practices were kind of seeded by Freud and Jung, were based around the psyche. They were based around what was happening in the mind. We even have this word that we always use, like mental health, but it's not a separate entity, right? The mind, the body are linked, and mental health actually comes enormously out of what's happening in our physiology. And so there's been this kind of split between body and mind, and a lot of talk therapy, which came out of the sort of evolution of psychology and psychotherapy, focuses therefore on the story. It's what's happening at the level of the mind. And I know many people who've spent many years going over story in a psychotherapeutic approach, and that obviously doesn't take into account what is happening in the body.
And at times you're solidifying the stories at times too, right? So it's an interesting combination there, even further away from the body.
Yeah, and one of the things that's also been found is when people talk about the story, they actually push themselves deeper into survival states, because what you're doing is, as you talk about it, you're reenacting often the embodied memories from the experience. And if the experience was threatening, dangerous, scary, anxiety, fear-inducing, well, guess what? You have what's called an emotional flashback, and you go right back into that, which actually keeps you stuck in a physiological state that's not beneficial. So if we look at a lot of the symptoms that come out of those experiences, obviously flashbacks, which are often visual as opposed to recognizing that they're emotional, insomnia, anxiety, rage, feeling different to before, feeling isolated. These are all signs of fight, flight, or freeze. And, the more we focus on it, the more that we actually go into those states. So when you're working with an embodied approach bottom up, actually what you're doing is you're looking at the symptoms first, identifying, okay, this person then is stuck in fight flight. And if we are treating individuals that have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder, both of which are the outcome of trauma that is still unresolved in the system. So whichever term you're using, the underlying element is that. The difference being that complex post-traumatic stress disorder is where the trauma has happened in early childhood, which means it's often been repetitive. It's often gone on for long periods of time. You know, it could be being bullied in school. It could be in a home where you have a parent who has a mental health problem and therefore is very inconsistent in their way that they parent you. They may be loving one minute and the next minute full of rage. You may have a parent who was an alcoholic or an addict, which means, again, parenting was very inconsistent in their ability to keep soothing you. You know, there may have been a lot of verbal abuse, physical abuse, or other types.
And so by witnessing that, then the child, it's normalized in their system then to kind of go from perhaps a moment of safety to then fight, flight. Is that kind of what's happening in terms of their nervous system, or?
Well, these households produce individuals who have complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And the piece to understand is that, unfortunately, if you've grown up in chronic stress like that, you have no reference point of embodied safety. You have no reference point of a nervous system that is calm and safe.
Oof.
It's not outside of you and it's not inside of you. So you really don't know anything's wrong. I mean, you may find things are wrong because you yourself, you know, go down the path of substance use or abuse or
dissociation.
Yeah, and other behaviours that are often called dysfunctional behaviours, which is actually, I think, a very unkind way of speaking to someone that really can't help themselves.
And like much of the medical model, right? Like putting these terms in boxes sometimes really misses the human aspect of.
It does, although I actually think it's very useful because it does. In the context of being able to get the right treatment, it's very helpful to be able to say, "Oh, I've broken my leg. I need X." The problem is that particularly complex post-traumatic stress disorder is often rarely diagnosed, and you know, as a consequence, people frequently do not receive the right help that they need. So they might go to talk therapy. The other piece I wanted to share is that it's, you know, the bottom-up approach. You're working to help the nervous system experience what it never experienced. So you're bringing in what was missing, right? And it's one of the reasons I struggle with this term trauma release that everyone is using, because, or even, you know, I must get rid of my addiction, I must get rid of my bad eating habits. Actually, we have to bring in what was missing first. And this kind of pop psychology approach, which is ditch the bad stuff, you can't. Because what's underneath that is often an absence of love. It's an absence of safety. So that has to be worked into the system gently. There has to be enough of that cultivated and enough evidence for those protector parts of you to let go. To then be able to work to grow up the system of that person to learn the things that you don't learn when you have a chaotic parent. You don't learn about boundaries. You don't learn that your needs are important. So it's a deeper process. Whereas with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, there can be a very different scenario, which is that someone grew up in a home where they learned all of those things, and then they went out into the world and they got caught up in a dangerous experience, a terrifying experience. And after that experience, they changed. They suddenly experienced depression, they suddenly experienced flashbacks, they suddenly experienced social anxiety. I mean, there's a myriad of things that can happen, but there's a very clear before and after. And in that scenario, then again, you would be working bottom up to help discharge from that person's nervous system the thwarted trauma response that they're in, so that they can move back into, we'll call it the rest and digest place, where their nervous system can, you know, be back in those states of joy and safety and connection. But they already have that as an embodied experience. They have a set point inside that also helps them know something's wrong. The trickier group are the ones that grew up without that, and they really don't know. And these are often the individuals that are sort of stumbling around, seeking, sometimes in all the wrong places, and not finding what they truly need, which is often actually attachment therapy, somatic therapies to help bring in the things that we're missing and restore the system, actually.
Complex indeed. And so if we can focus on, complex PTSD in regards to somatic experiencing, for example, what does that look like? A client comes to you, perhaps they're unaware, you identify it in their care that, there is no ground of safety there. How is that established?
So for me, one of the most important things is to identify whether or not there was body-based trauma, because often there has been, either through inappropriate touch or some kind of physical abuse, so being spanked or hit or something to that effect. Or it can also be that there's been medical trauma or even trauma from dentistry, where you've been subjected to an experience that was deeply uncomfortable, and as a result you've dissociated from your body. So what it looks like is a lot of patience, going very slowly to first and foremost re-establish choice for the individual. So in these experiences I just mentioned, choice is robbed from us. Things happen to us, and because we're little and we don't have a voice, we have no agency when we're knee-high to a grasshopper, we're just silenced. There's no way that we can say, hey, this is not okay. And so the first two elements are bringing in choice and helping that person find voice in relation to choice. So an example might be that in a beginning session, I'm inviting the client to decide, to choose where they would like me to sit in the room that is the most comfortable for them. So we're already seeding in the opportunity that they get to check in with themselves and make a request. And most of the time, that's very uncomfortable for someone with that kind of history. And often, I will see the cues that let me know that they're probably not being completely honest with themselves. So let's say if I sit here and they'll say, yeah, it's fine. And because we're working somatically, I can feel that it's maybe not fine for them. And I will invite them to just, notice their sensations again and just see what's really there. Is there any crunching sensation? Is there a tightness? All of those things let me know that they're still bracing in some way. And then I will generally say, I'm going to just move back a few more inches. Notice what happens. And as I give them the space to have more distance, they start to see that actually relaxation comes into their system. So it's a very deep way of helping to establish trust in an environment where there's been no trust with other human beings. Sometimes I will end up all the way outside of the door of the space I'm working in, because that's how much distance that person needs. And for most people to have that degree of embodied safety offered back to them frequently for the first time in their life is already a huge epiphany. It's like, oh my God, I've been walking around in this world not able to say no to things, not able to request the space I need, putting up with, pretending, going along with, and not having the capacity because they're still stuck in some ways at the point at which the trauma arose. So we're bringing in what's called corrective experiences in that. And also I'm building trust with them so that they know that as we go deeper into the sessions and maybe there's touch involved or something, that I am going to entirely honour what is right for their body. It's never me coming at them, doing anything to them. They're the guide. And so to be put back into this position of power,
where their voice matters,
where
it's
their
such a
voice
big deal.
absolutely matters and is honoured no matter what, it's very alien. And it takes time to cultivate that in someone. But it's deeply transformative, and I'm chuckling because I was just with a former client and something happened where somebody went to give them a hug and they asserted their boundary around that, and I was like, high five, like really big. And if you take into account someone who's really experienced repeat body trauma in a home setting particularly, you have no voice. You can't. It's just not, it's not something that's being developed in you.
Very foreign. So getting to know your nose and getting to even trust you as a therapist is such a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I always respect that will take as much time as it needs.
Yeah.
But because working with the field that way, working with that level of choice, And I mean, really, and then doing versions of that in each session, and before anything happens in any session, it cultivates. Trauma healing is really about bringing in new possibility. It's not about just releasing the trauma. And one of the reasons it's not about releasing the trauma is we can never release the trauma. It is our history. So it's part of this rejectionist kind of approach, which says, this was bad, I must get rid of it. And actually, the truth is, when you recover someone from the trauma, they can actually often sit there and proudly say, wow, that happened to me, but look who I am now. So it's more like we put our arm around it and bring it in as an ally that says, I survived that, wow, and look how I've grown. And bad things happen, but I'm not only good now, I'm amazing. And so, because otherwise we're still trying to reject our own history. And
resisting something, it's going to persist inevitably.
Well, and the rejecting the history is part of the trauma response, the shame that's often associated with, I don't want to be that person, those things happened, I didn't know how to deal with them. And part of the healing process is being able to be witnessed, even in the darkest things that have happened, and see that we're still being held and loved and seen, and your therapist is not rejecting you. You're really being received for that. And then also another layer for me, which is vital, is celebrating the protector parts. So instead of rejecting them and saying, okay, the smoking is bad, we need to throw that out, it's like, so the smoking was a way to self-soothe when no one else was around. So let's celebrate the part that was wise enough to come up with that idea. Let's really applaud it and let it know it's been doing an amazing job for the last 20 years. And it sounds completely counter, but when you do that, you watch these parts kind of shine. They're
been
finally someone is acknowledging me, because you're going I don't want to smoke anymore, I don't want to do this to myself. And then it's like, and are you open to finding a better way, to do even better? And just as you would with an employee or someone you were working with, of course, the new way. And so then you get this beautiful ally developing with this part, and then you start to move it into seeking evidence of a new way. But there's this, new relationship between you and this part that's been trying to protect you, but often protecting with something that also has a destructive element to it. So it's a bit like homeopathy in a weird way. In homeopathy, it's like you take a tiny bit of the poison. And so in this, the tiny bit of poison that has been developed as a protector, instead of throwing it out, we're using it to create the new relationship without getting rid of it, and then it changes form.
Wow, it's powerful stuff. And I can see, in my own experience, I have done parts therapy and have experienced that initial rejection. This isn't serving me, I don't want it. And the sooner we witness that part, like you said, the charge diminishes, and the kind of on guard nature of that part becomes a bit softer and more delicate and open to that form of reparenting, right? So where we can trust ourselves over time. And so after choice, what would be the next stage that you'd be getting into with clients after that?
I mean, again, it really does depend on their trauma history, but more often than not, it's boundaries. It's understanding that, as I said, in that kind of an environment, and even in a event-specific trauma where something happens to us, usually it has impacted our boundaries in some way. So, but for those that grew up in houses where there were no boundaries, then you can't tell someone to just create boundaries. They have no clue. And first and foremost, boundaries come from what is called our felt sense. So we notice that someone is perhaps pushing our boundary due to the sensations that arise in our body. So if someone's pushing your boundary, you're most likely going to feel a kind of tension in your belly area, right? It's and that's because, we take this from yoga, but your solar plexus linked to the sun is about identity. It's about how you are perceived in the world, how you present in the world, but also how people come into a relationship with us. So we feel that if someone's pushing, get this sensation here. But if you've grown up in an environment where your boundaries are just pounded every single day, that you don't feel those sensations. So often we're working initially with numbness and helping to recognize that numbness is a sensation, but it's very difficult to feel if that's been your lived state, right? And then as we start to expand what is called introception, which is our ability to notice what's happening inside the body, then we can start to find sensation. And, you know, some education in there around different sensations relate to different things. So just even noticing, oh, I was at this dinner, but this person kept talking to me and I noticed sensation. So that person was pushing your boundary, right? So it's learning the links between outside action, internal sensation. And then if you've never been taught this, the next piece is learning how to assert a boundary. And for most people, there's an enmeshment piece in early childhood dynamics where, you know, the parent is a tyrant, or maybe the parent is depressed and has lots of emotional needs. And so the fear is, gosh, if I speak up, I'm going to trigger the tyrant and they're going to get angry with me and maybe punish me, or I'm going to trigger the depression and the emotional flood and I can't hold that. So there's this underlying fear, an inability to say a boundary, which as a healthy adult, we can say a boundary and it's really none of our business how the other person responds to that. That's their stuff. If it's a boundary for us, it's a boundary for us. And so learning the art of that, learning to be able to say, thanks, but I'm not really available for a conversation right now. Boundary, right? That can be terrifying.
Absolutely. When you've never been exposed and there was huge consequences once upon a time for ever having a voice.
And what happens is that subtle sensation of kind of like the crunching from a boundary being pushed then turns into your nervous system going into fight-flight response and chaos because you're the fear of maybe having to say something. So there's a lot of work that comes in there of teaching how to regulate your nervous system when a boundary is being pushed and you know you have to say something. So
your heart is racing and your stomach is falling. Yeah.
So it's really going back to infancy and teaching this adult the skills that they didn't naturally get from a healthy parenting model. And this again takes time.
Always.
And what I love about it is there's always a sort of period of, you know, trying to ride the bicycle and falling off and, you know, things being wonky and a few grazed knees. And then there's a point where it's just like, oh, I've got this, but it takes time to cultivate. And then there's usually a layer. It's like, well, I got really good at doing this in this space, but then I met this person and they really triggered.
I was a child again.
Those parts, and I couldn't do it. And so, yeah, sometimes that takes, you know, a year or so. So for someone to really master that in all areas of their life, it's not easy. It's a slow process. It's like watching a plant grow.
Yeah.
But planting the seeds and then also working with sometimes the shame that can come up when you've been in a situation and you haven't been able to assert. This is particularly true for, you know, individuals who've suffered sexual abuse dynamics in their childhood. And, you know, they may be fine in one area, but then when it comes to intimacy, there's just a collapse. And then, you know, this frustration of like, God, I got this here and I'm an adult and why can't I do this in this place? And then the subsequent shame cycle that one can spiral into as a result of that. So then we're also, you know, tending to that because we can be very hard on ourselves, right?
Big time. Yeah, self-compassion, self-love, but again, foreign if you haven't been exposed to it your whole life. Yeah.
So it's cultivating boundaries, it's cultivating self-agency, it's supporting individuals to also find other individuals who are living that way because we learn a lot by osmosis, right?
And community again, right?
And often, you know, we're still tied to a family system where boundaries and communication isn't happening. So you've also got to learn sometimes to then have boundaries with the people that are your bloodline, but they haven't learned that yet. And that can also be super challenging because you kind of want to go and show them and they're not available. So it's finding healthy spaces to be in, healthy relationships to be in too. So yeah, choice, self-agency, boundaries, managing the nervous system, and that too, learning to be able to measure what I call embodied safety and recognizing I'm in embodied safety, I'm in this place of rest and digest, and when we start to come out, and then learning the somatic tools, you mentioned somatic, to work to shift gears inside ourselves to come back to that place relatively quickly, know exactly which practice to use, and know that we are then fully in charge of our own ship, right? We're not needing someone else to come in and do that. It can be nice to have someone come out and do that, but we're really in what I call healthy adult when we have all those skills down.
And you're an active participant in life and actually choosing rather than being driven by this autopilot. And so it's something that you spoke to earlier, this sense of numbness. You know, I can attest to that historically, especially. And for listeners that are struggling, this is a common sensation for them. Mm-hmm. What would that look like in a session with you, or what tools would you guide people? Is it really just sitting in stillness with themselves, like to identify these different sensations in their bodies when they're coming from a place of numbness?
Yeah, I mean, dissociation and numbness are strongly linked. It's part of the freeze response, and very heavily linked also to depression. And a lot of people will oscillate actually between numbness and anxiety and intensity, and those two particularly are common when someone has undiagnosed PTSD or diagnosed PTSD, but a lot of people have undiagnosed. So and when we go into that sort of numbness, we tend to feel very disconnected from life, socially, emotionally. We will much more likely lean into things that have a morose element to them. So smoking weed, lying around watching TV, eating lots of sugar, comfort foods, and also substance use that is not the drugs that... it's kind of drugs that will give you very intense experiences because we're looking to feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or we might get really into extreme sports. We're looking to feel something, but it takes a lot for that to happen. Mm. Whereas someone who's in rest and digest is unlikely to want to take up skydiving as a hobby, right? So, being self-aware of that. But for most people, it's very difficult to identify that numb state. And the problem is that often that numbness is protecting us from trauma memories that have a lot of painful emotions attached to them. A lot of terror or a lot of fear, or feeling very hurt emotionally from neglect or the absence of care. And so it's very difficult to just climb out of that solo. You really do need someone to help, support, and like I said, bring in the things that we're missing. Safe connection, care, curiosity, somebody actually having interest in your needs and your emotional state. It's easier to tend to the fight-flight responses by oneself, but this one particularly, because it's an avoidance of self. It's like we're hovering outside of ourselves. In shamanism and all the indigenous cultures, they call this soul loss. It's like when things happen repeatedly over time, we leave the body. It's like we don't want to take up residence here. It's not safe. So there's a lot to helping someone really recover themselves from that. But embodiment practices, the right kind of embodiment practices, so things like trauma-sensitive yoga, trauma-informed yoga, TRE, which stands for trauma release exercises, are both somatic approaches that are really effective at down-regulating the nervous system, bringing you out from that place of dissociation. Similarly, somebody who is trained in somatic experiencing and can help bring in enough safety to help you kind of move. The problem is that when we come from this numb, dissociated place, we have to go into fight-flight. And fight is a red zone. It's kind of anger and rage and anxiety and heat. And so this is why it's very difficult to come out of that state alone. And when we come into fight-flight, if you've been numb and not feeling for a couple of decades, to suddenly start feeling, and the feelings that you feel be these intense ones of kind of like panic and rage and anxiety, doesn't feel very good. So you really need support in moving through that particular phase so that you can kind of come out the other side, which is where you will feel peace and connection and joy and different kinds of sensations. But it can be extremely intense, extremely challenging to go through that portal, but it's the way home, it's the way back to living in the way that you were designed, which is a fully feeling being, right? And the problem is that if we're in that numb place, we are not only shut down to anger and rage, which often are deemed bad, but they're not. Anger is an essential emotion that, particularly if boundaries are being pushed, we need.
Absolutely,
right?
And natural.
But if we're in that numbness, we're also not able to experience the full spectrum of joy and love and connectedness too. So it's often a very lonely place.
Absolutely. And I can see how it continues, right? Because if you step out and any of these feelings, these foreign feelings start to emerge, it's terrifying. So it's like, okay, shut down again, shut down, and go back.
Yeah. It's something that is quite common in yoga classes, actually. You know, the teachers who are not trauma informed might say at the end of the class, oh, you know, so now everybody's feeling so relaxed and it's all peace and love. And actually you have people lying there suddenly feeling rage in their bodies because they've, through the movement of yoga, have actually started to kind of shift through those nervous system states, and they're not relaxed at all. And it can be very confusing and alienating if the teacher is telling you, right, now we're in Shavasana, or you're all relaxed, and it's like, well, actually I'm not. I'm feeling pain or rage or heat or fury. So again, this is for me one of the reasons why having this trauma awareness lens is so important.
Absolutely. It's even more isolating and dangerous, right? Because then that person is feeling alienated and ostracized and there's something wrong with me. So then again, recluse, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, trauma awareness training, again, learning to operate in the systems that we are provided. And I really like the distinction of actually showing ourselves, if we have that history of complex PTSD, what is safety? And cultivating that with a practitioner is crucial. Yeah. Wow, Gemini, we're coming to a close here. It's been such an honor to discuss these really intense and prevalent topics here with you today. Is there anything that you feel you'd like to share that we haven't covered yet so far?
Yeah, something just bubbled up, this notion of embodied safety as something that, you know, if you're in a family system where there are healthy boundaries established and good communication and good emotional support and you know, there's no abuse happening, then what happens is that your system is, your intuitive system, your gut-brain connection is very easily able to identify when something is off. You know, we talk about gut feeling, right? So you go through life with a sort of strong compass that lets you know when somebody else isn't safe. And you're going to notice that, feel that in your body and go, I'm just going to walk away. You don't need to know why intellectually. And unfortunately, when you've grown up in an environment where those particular traits are missing, it interrupts the gut-brain connection. And so not only do you not have a set point of embodied safety, but nor can you measure safety on the outside of yourself. So there's a much higher chance that you're going to put yourself into situations that are high risk, whether that be with other abusive people or, you know, maybe just walking down an alleyway where there is something dangerous at the end of it. And so there are a lot of somatic practices, and something that's really beneficial is understanding that this mind-body communication system runs through something called the vagus nerve inside our bodies. And that if we can do practices that increase our vagal tone or our vagal health, yoga is one of those, then we can actually restore that mind-gut, mind-body communication system and grow our capacity to also be able to measure safety outside of us, so that we become, we're able to protect ourselves, which is also really important.
Absolutely. Yeah, some attunement to what's actually going on around us rather than a misperception, which I think is, all too common. I've experienced personally myself too, like a sense of distrust when there's actually complete safety, you know, objectively looking at a scenario, okay, this is actually okay, yet there is this part of me that's, you know, really trying to knock at my door and take over. Yeah, so that's something really, really valuable to share.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gemini.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on. Yeah, there's so much to say here. And if you could leave our listeners really with a thought, an idea, or a message, what would that be?
Well, I've just been working on the materials for our next trauma awareness training. And there was a quote I'm probably going to butcher right now, but it's something to the effect of when we share our shame in safe spaces, it dissolves. And so an enormous part of trauma recovery work is healing the shame of what happened, that we were alone in the experience. There was no one there to help us. We thought that we were bad, that we were the cause of it. And it's not as intellectual as that, but when we're young particularly, we internalize in that way. And so I just think that really encouraging people to get support, to go out and find someone who's particularly trained in somatic therapy, or to even talk therapy at least, better still to find someone who also knows how to work with shame, can literally bring you out of the cage that you have been trapped in. And it can feel, I know from my own experience, I felt different, I felt separated, I felt caged in some way, and there is a way out. It took me a long time to get to the right things, and it just doesn't have to be that way. And there are so many people out there now offering this work. And yeah, it's the best investment you will ever make, to come out of that cage and feel alive and connected, and to come home to yourself in this way. So just that you really don't need to suffer.
So empowering. Yeah. Be seen, be held, be heard in your reality. What a gift.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And Gemini, thank you. Where can people find you?
So I have a website, which is my full name, GeminiAdams.com. There is a contact form on there. I also have a Facebook page that is in my own name. And the organisation that I created, which is Union, Relational Healing and Trauma Recovery Institute, is where we run these educational programs from, or through, I should say. At the moment, I'm on a little bit of a kind of pulled back from that somewhat, just due to some health challenges I'm experiencing, but coming soon there will be more programs, more products that we'll be putting out to support, I would say, just the average person, rather than where the focus has been, which has been very much on helping practitioners and space holders to understand these elements so that they can better support people that are coming into their classes and workshops and coaching programs.
Full circle. Prerequisite for humans. Yeah, exactly. Let's do it.
All the way back.
Yes, knowledge is power, and we are entitled to it. And the sooner we can access and develop community and have support from practitioners, therapists, this kind of stuff, it really, music to my ears. Thank you again for your time, Gemini.
Thank you.
That's it for today. Thank you for listening. I truly hope that today's conversation was valuable to you. To learn more about today's guests, including links and resources related to everything discussed today, visit the episode page at soulplaycollective.com. I'm so grateful you're here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. So don't be shy. Send in your comments and let us know how each episode is resonating with you. If you'd like to support the podcast, the easiest and most impactful thing you can do is to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube, and leave a review and/or comment. Sharing the show or your favorite episodes with friends or on social media is fantastic and super appreciated. And finally, for podcast updates, please follow us on Instagram at soulplay.collective and at Soulplay Collective on Facebook and YouTube. Appreciate the love and support. See you back here soon.